a lot of new people, especially in the Google Meet. So I'm Allison Grant. I'm meeting a lot of you for the first time. I'm one of the owners here at Realty One Group Revolution. I help a lot with training and more kind of the tech tools that we use here at the firm. So anything we go over today or any of the Realty One Group tools that you guys are using in your business, I'd love to help you learn more about those tools and make them functional for your business. So you guys should all have my contact information. You've got our information, a lot of the emails that have been coming across. We still got people coming in. Good morning. Hi. So today I just wanted to go over a couple of things. Before we get started, I do want to mention something coming up for the firm that hasn't been announced yet, but I want to make sure everybody knows about it. March 8th, we're going to be doing, I guess it's our first quarter, or March 5th, sorry, our first quarter volunteer opportunity. So we like to do a give back to the community event every quarter here at the firm. So March 5th, from 8 to 4, we're going to be working with Habitat for Humanity what are we doing that day, Logan? Did they say trim work?
Trim framing,
Interior framing
trim work.
and trim work. No, that last time we did
Frame a second story.
a second story. Anyway, it's a great opportunity to get together with your fellow agents and actually make a difference in our community. And it's kind of fun work. So we hope to see you guys there. Information's going to be coming out about that. Okay, sorry. I've got an echo here. Okay, today we wanted to have this training, guys, especially because we've got two firms that have come together, and one of those firms had a kind of slightly different way of doing things. So we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. A lot of this should be the same for everybody, but there's nuances to it. So definitely wanted to hit on how you can stay compliant with your firm's policies and procedures that a lot of you probably, well, you select agents just got to review those recently. Maybe some of our older Roger agents haven't looked at them in a while, but we just want to make sure everybody's staying compliant and keeping everything reported to the firm in a timely manner and in a proper way. So we're going to go over some of those items today. Here, if you're with me, I passed out, I don't know if everybody got one. It's the actual compliance policies and procedures. It's just a 2-page document. Everybody has access to this document. I want to remind you that on Sundays, you receive an email from Taylor Moore with a lot of information about things that are happening that week at the firm, but a lot of ongoing supplemental information is in that email as well. It's called the Roger Rundown. At the bottom of that email, she has a link to a Google Drive, which is called Agent Resources, Roger Agent Resources. Anything you guys are mostly asking us for is in that folder. So once you access the folder, it will be shared with you permanently in your drive. So you'll always be able to get back to it in your Google Drive. If you lose it, you can find Taylor's email and open it back up. And in that folder is going to be this compliance procedures that I just passed out to everybody here. We're going to kind of go over the highlights of it, though. But if you're wanting the exact document, it is in that folder. Okay, rules to remember when it comes to compliance with the firm. We use the platform SkySlope. I know a lot of you that have been in this business a long time have used all sorts of compliance and document platforms. We've been using SkySlope for a long time. A lot of other real estate firms use SkySlope. If you're new to the firm and you're used to .loop, this is like our version of .loop. But SkySlope is a suite of products that the products work together. So you've got your SkySlope compliance, which when you click on SkySlope, that's the screen you usually see first and foremost. And then you've got your SkySlope forms. So SkySlope forms is not SkySlope compliance. And that's the problem that we're running into with a lot of people's files. They think because they've created a file in forms and they've got all their documents signed, that's all they need to do. But that's not where it ends. You do actually have to report all of your contracts, whether it be a listing or a transaction, into your SkySlope compliance. So you're going to have to go out of the forms back into SkySlope. That's what we're going to do today, and report your transaction or your listing into SkySlope. We do have a 72-hour rule. That's not even our rule. That's a North Carolina Real Estate Commission rule. If you get a property under contract, or you have a listing that you're putting in the MLS and it's signed by the sellers, you do need to report that to your firm. Your BIC has to have access to all those documents. We cannot access your forms. If you just have a listing agreement signed in forms, we don't know that. We're only looking at SkySlope. So you have to make sure that you take that file and convert it over into SkySlope. Okay? And your BIC has to have access to those documents, and they need to be signed within 72 hours. Where are the required documents for SkySlope? Well, most of the documents are going to be, the forms that you're dealing with, North Carolina forms, the listing agreement, the buyer's agency, the contract, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some documents that are required in the checklist that are not, coming from forms. They are internal documents. For example, the most important one is the closing transaction form. Okay, where would this form be? Well, there's two places that you can locate that form. One is in the shared Google folder, Roger Agent Resources. You can find it right there when you click into the folder. Another place that you can find that document is inside of SkySlope. There is a place called Working Documents. I'm going to show it to you today when we get into SkySlope. And you can also find that document inside of SkySlope. So that's the two places you have that document. You can also save this document to your computer and fill it out however you like to fill it out. But it is a fillable PDF that needs to be completed in order for you to get paid your commissions. We've had a lot of people lately asking us what to do with checks. We did have just a switch over for our Roger agents from the past. We just switched banks to Wells Fargo. So that's kind of a new thing for everybody at the firm. We bank with Wells Fargo at this point. Our favorite thing for you to do with a check is to have the attorney wire it to our account, our Wells Fargo account. The wiring instructions are, you guessed it, in the Roger Agent Resources folder. If you need those wiring instructions, you can provide them to the attorney. There's a phone number on that page that they can call to confirm the wiring instructions. Most attorneys do that, which is a good practice. They will be calling Amanda Ellinger, our compliance officer, and she will confirm those instructions for them. But the best thing to do is have your commission wired. Then there's no checks. You're not having to pick anything up. We're not having to wait in the mail for anything. Just have them wire it. Now, there are some attorneys that are being finicky about wiring these days. So the next best alternative would be for you to pick up the check. That way it's not getting put in the mail, just regular snail mail. Pick up the check. You can either do one of two things with the check. You can bring it to an office and let one of us know that you've brought the check into the office. It can be myself, Logan, or Andrea, or Barry. Let us know the check is in the office. Or even easier maybe for you could be to bring the check directly to a Wells Fargo. So you bring it in the Wells Fargo, you use the account information on that wiring instruction form, and give that information to the teller, and you can go ahead and get the commission check put into the account. So those are the three options with checks. Commission payout will happen probably on that same day if we have the check in the account and you have all of your paperwork in SkySlope and everything's been reviewed. You could get paid that day. I think if it's by 2 o'clock, is that Andrea or Amanda's rule? If everything's in by 2 o'clock, you could get paid same day. But if not, it'll just be the next day. So we like to get everybody paid quickly. Of course, that's a lot to do with you having your file complete in SkySlope and us having the check, of course. Okay. There is also a way in SkySlope to send notes and questions to Amanda Ellinger, who is the compliance officer. She's reviewing all of your files in SkySlope. I'm going to show you today. There's a little place where you can write a note to her or ask her a question about that particular checklist item. If you're not sure why it's asking for that, you can write her a little note and then she sees it and then she can reply to you in SkySlope, or alternatively, you can email her at rogrcompliance@gmail.com. Okay. This is a big one that I want to point out. This is from our policies procedures. This is just a little section I took out of there. We've had a big problem with this lately, guys, and I like to think that we're pretty laid back about a lot of things here. I mean, I've worked at other real estate firms that are much, much more strict about the way things are done. So we think we're pretty laid back, but we do have to have rules. And now, again, everything you do has to be reported into SkySlope. It should be there within 72 hours. We have been receiving commission checks. There's nothing in SkySlope. There's no files. Nobody's told us about it. I mean, we've had checks held for months where we don't have the file. And we even have some people here with us today that are guilty of that. But we are really going to need to start cracking down, and we have been cracking down. If your file is not complete in SkySlope and we have that check and we've been holding it for 30 days, we're going to be holding back 25% of that check. It's now the firm's 25%. We don't need to have all this money in our account that is not our money. So that's a lot of burden for us to deal with when we don't know what's happening with this money, how much we're keeping, how much you're getting. File's not complete for 60 days, you're going to lose 50% of the commission. And if we don't have it by 90 days, you're not getting any of the commission. Okay. So putting the fear of God in you, don't lose your whole commission check. We don't want to do that, guys. It's just, I mean, we even have things coming from one tax year. We're carrying those funds from one tax year to the next tax year. If you're not closing out your files in December, we're carrying it over into January. So just get your stuff taken care of. 30 days is like a long time. We shouldn't even be giving you that much time, but, okay, I just wanted to go over those compliance procedures, and if anybody has any questions about that, does anybody have any questions? Is there anything in the chat? Taylor, can you see if there's anything in the chat? Any questions? Anybody here have any questions about that? Okay. All right. So now I'm going to have to do some maneuvering to switch over to, I'm going to have to escape out of here. Okay, are you guys seeing my screen? Perfect. Okay. All right, we're going to get started into our forms and creating file and moving that through compliance and kind of going through the process. Again, we're all using this same process. I've heard from some agents that they still want to use like zip forms for their forms because they've done that forever. I even have a couple of agents that are so in love with dot loop that they pay extra to use dot loop, and I'm not quite sure why. SkySlope is a pretty easy thing to manipulate. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I just know that we get used to doing things a certain way and we don't want to change, but I promise it's not that hard. As I'm going through this, if anybody has any questions, Taylor's gonna keep an eye on the chat for me because I can't really do that. But we're gonna go ahead and get into our SkySlope. Now we're going to be working on North Carolina forms today, and you guys, I'm going to try to get through as many as I can, but as we know, there's tons of forms. I'm going to pretty much try to focus on the areas where I know we have questions and we see problems and we see the forms completed incorrectly. So I'm going to try to focus on those things, but I may move ahead quickly on other areas that I think we're mostly okay with, but you guys can always stop me to ask questions. Okay, so again, we've come into SkySlope. This is SkySlope compliance. Every time you see the gold screen and it gives you that encouraging little let's get after it quote. I love when I log into it at night. It's like, ooh, burning the midnight oil. Yeah, rock star, killing it. I like those little encouraging quotes they have in there. But this is SkySlope compliance. This is where you need to report things to the firm. Forms is for you. SkySlope compliance is for the firm. So whenever you have a listing that is a signed listing agreement or a transaction with a buyer, or your listing has gone under contract, all of that needs to be reported here in the gold screen. They did kind of change the look of this like a year ago. So if any of you have been used to using SkySlope, it kind of looked a little bit different. But anyway, they're always updating the layout of things. I don't love this big black section on the left here. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I think this black section makes you kind of skip some steps if you pick any of these options here. It kind of takes you into documents without first creating a file, and I don't really love that. I think it's a best practice to create a file first and then add the forms to the file. So I don't ever click any of these little shortcut buttons here, but you of course could click here for to get into forms, or alternatively, you can also come up here to the app section and switch to forms that way. Before I leave this area, I do want to point out, since we were just talking about the closing transaction form, where you can get it here in SkySlope. It used to be easier to find on the main page. It used to say working documents on this main page, but they changed it where you now have to click into this more section, and then you have to find working documents. And then it's probably going to be slow today, as it always is. And you have to switch from personal documents to office documents. So you have to make sure you toggle over to office documents, open up this little folder, and then you're going to see a bunch of great documents in here. The wire instructions are in here too, the W-9, and the closing transaction form. If anybody wants to see what that looks like, maybe some of our folks from Select had a different type of form. I hope this one isn't too different. It's pretty straightforward. It asks you some questions. This is just so we know we're on the same page about what commission you're expecting to get, and we're on the same page as you. Like we're all have the same understanding. Of course, Amanda's going to check this for accuracy, of course, but yeah. That's the closing transaction form. Anybody have any questions about that form? Taylor, anybody have any questions? Okay. Cool. Let's go back to SkySlope. Okay, we're going to switch over into forms now and get a file going. Okay. The best way to start a file is just to click this create button here. Also, in your forms, guys, if you haven't customized your settings in forms, go over there into the right-hand corner where it has your initials and update your settings, because everything that you put into this section here is going to copy over into the documents. So you're saving yourself time. You're not having to write your license number every time. Just update it as much as possible so that you save yourself time in the long run. Okay, so we're going to first start out with a buyer client today. We're going to work with a buyer. Now, everybody on this call, I know, knows that when you start this buyer file, you're probably going to start with a buyer agency and a working with real estate agents, right? We wouldn't likely be writing an offer the same day we're writing the buyer's agency, right? Okay. But for the sake of putting all the documents in here today and going through them, we're going to put in an offer. We wouldn't be doing that all at the same time. Of course not. But today we will be. Okay, so I'm going to create a client here for you guys. This is just going to be a fake person. But I am going to use my email address so that I can get these emails. Now, SkySlope does talk to the MLS. So if we were writing an offer for this client, you could import that MLS data, which I'm going to do quickly. I'm going to grab, I don't know if these folks are on this call, but this is somebody's listing up there in Huntersville. So we're going to go ahead and import that information. That just saves us having to type more into the documents. You can name your files in forms. Again, forms is for you. You can name your files whatever makes sense in your brain. I usually name them the person's last name and then / buyer or seller until I have an address. Once I have an address, then I usually put the person's last name and then the address. So this, who did I name this person? Smith. So that's usually how I name mine. Now, we do have templates that you can use in forms. Oh, hi. Hey. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Somebody just delivered donuts. This is Jimmy, you guys. He's with True Homes. Sorry for the people. Sorry for the people. Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Jimmy. Sorry, guys. We got donuts. Okay, so you can use these templates if you like to go ahead and bring all the forms in at one time that you're going to need for that specific situation. The templates available to you are going to be based on your libraries, your licensure. So your templates might be different than my templates. And of course, you can create your own templates too. Like if you consistently use the same 6 documents in North Carolina and you want to make a template that always has those 6 documents filled out the way you like to fill them out, create yourself a template and then it will always be appearing here. But I'm actually not going to use a template today because I want to put the forms in myself. And I don't usually use a template. I just kind of build the file based on what I need. Okay, so we're going to add the forms we need for today. I just usually search up here in the search bar. So we're going to do working with real estate agents. You can always click on the document's name to double check what it looks like. Here you could actually print it if you needed to, or download just the blank document. But I just wanted to confirm that was the one I wanted. Okay, next I'm going to search for our buyer agency. Now this is, again, I could have limited my libraries to just North Carolina, but I have all my libraries in here, so it's showing me all the results. I'm going to go ahead and add 201. So now you see down here at the bottom, it's building the forms that I've added to this file. Okay, we're going to add an offer to purchase in there, Form 2T. And if I was making an offer on this property, I would need to upload some documents in here as well, like the seller disclosures, the mineral oil gas. For the sake of time today, guys, I'm just going to upload that one disclosure, but you know that you would have to do the MOG as well. Okay. Offer to purchase, buyer's agency, working with real estate agents. Oh, I'm also going to go ahead and upload the professional services disclosure. That is one of our checklist items that you do. Oh, we don't want that one. See, that's why I double check. We don't want a commercial form. We've actually had a lot of agents uploading commercial forms when they don't need to be doing a commercial form. Like, make sure you're doing the residential form. So double check it here. If it's got the red writing at the top and says commercial, that's not right. Unless you're doing commercial, which you're allowed to do, but for the most part, I think we need to stick with the residential. Okay, this looks good. I'm gonna put that one in there. Okay. So for now, that is all I'm gonna load in here. And at this point, I'm gonna upload the seller disclosure because I need the one signed by the seller. Taking its time. Okay. Now, at this point here, I could upload more documents. I could add more forms. I can select all of these documents. And once I select them, I can also choose to download the documents, print the documents. So if you're meeting a client that is just never going to get this digital signing situation, and that's okay, like they don't have email, you're just going to have to print them out and bring them to them. And I know I find myself having to do that more and more lately. It seems like older generation just don't want to get those emails. So that's okay. We do what we need to. But I'm going to go ahead and select all of these because we're going to go through and talk about how we're completing these. So we're going to click fill and send. Now I've got all my documents over here on the left. If you want to rearrange these, you can. Like if you don't like the order that they're in, I usually like to put working with real estate agents first, buyer agency. I would probably put this professional services disclosure at the end because we actually wouldn't be having them sign the professional services disclosure until we're into that due diligence period and we've been getting our inspections and we've been talking about what we're going to get done. That's typically when I get that signed. Okay. So here's the point where I can fill these out. Agency is always something that we all have a lot of questions about, dual agency, designated dual agency. Now with our firm having, we got about 170 agents, I really want you guys to encourage people to accept dual agency. I mean, you're going to have to get them to accept that if you ever want to show a buyer a listing with the firm. They're just going to have to accept dual agency. So if they want to not be able to look at any of the listings in the firm, then okay, no dual agency, but that's really not a smart thing, I would think, for them to do. So I've never had a person not want to do dual agency. Brian, have you ever had a problem with that? No, I've never, everybody's always accepted it. Now designated dual agency would mean that the firm would represent both you, the buyer, and the seller, but the firm would designate an agent to represent you and a different agent to represent the seller. I always check this box as well because I don't like to, and I will not represent both sides of a transaction. That's just my personal business belief. I don't want to represent a seller and a buyer. I don't think I'm really representing anybody in that scenario. I will work with a seller and have an unrepresented buyer, which I did recently do, and I had them check this box. Okay, but they wouldn't check any of the other boxes. They would just be an unrepresented buyer. So this is how I complete this form. If you have everything updated in your profile, all of this is already going to be filled out for you. And Taylor, you let me know if anybody's asking me any questions, okay? Okay, buyer agency agreement. So we're just going to go through this really quickly. If you guys have questions along the way, usually in the property description, I don't get too detailed, but like if they're specifically looking for a single family home and it needs to be in a certain school district, I would say, I would type that in here. But I don't want to be too specific because as we know, people have pretty specific wants at the beginning, but then they kind of loosen up what they're looking for. This is just so that you and the buyer understand that you're kind of on the same page about generally what they're looking for. Okay, so we have some like flexibility. On some of these things we have flexibility, on others we don't. So I'm going to try and point out where we do. Buyer disclosures, buyer has not signed a document with another real estate agent or firm. Buyer is not working with a relocation company, or maybe they are. Check the appropriate box. This is buyer has or has not received sample copies of the purchase contract and professional services disclosure form. You could send those documents to this buyer along with this buyer agency, and then they would have received the sample copies. And there are sample copies in the forms library, so you can search for the sample. You don't have to send them the full, I mean, it is the full document, but it says like sample across the front of it. So then you've just covered your bases. You've sent them that for their review. But you don't have to do that. You just have to pick the appropriate box here. Okay, and we're going to tell them how long we would like to be working with them. I usually don't sign a buyer's agency for less than 3 months of time, but that's totally up to you how long you would like to extend this agency agreement. I usually tell my clients that, if something happens where we don't end up wanting to work with each other, then I'm happy to cancel the agency agreement. I'm not going to work with somebody that doesn't want to work with me. That's just not a great feeling. But And people usually are appreciative of that. I've never had to do that, but I try not to make it too long and I try not to make it too short. So 3 months is kind of my sweet spot. I don't know what everybody else here does. Brian, what do you do on buyer agencies? I'm going to pick Brian's brain because he's here. 3 to 6. Yeah. I mean, you kind of know if the person if they're talking to you, well, I don't have to move for 3 months. My lease is up in 3 months, then obviously you'd probably want to do a longer agency like 6 months to get them into the new house. But it's just kind of dependent on the situation. So I'm going to go let's just go with that date there. Okay. Fee for services. So this is a really important part, obviously. This is where we're talking about the compensation. Obviously, been a lot of discussion on this end. There's lots of ways you can get compensated by a buyer or by a seller. You can have your buyer give you a non-refundable retainer fee. We do have agents in the firm that do that. This could go towards the total compensation fee that you want from this buyer. Those do need to go through the firm, so they can't just write you a check, for $500. It has to come through the firm. And we do have some agents that like to do that. The most traditional one, of course, is going to be the brokerage fee. We can put whatever we want here because compensation is, up to the two people involved here. But I typically am doing a 2.5%. Some people do 3%. Some people try to get some of that from the seller, the rest from the buyer. Again, these are our own personal businesses, so we can run them however we want. But I typically put 2.5% here. The thing with this number is whatever you do end up earning on this transaction, it needs to match what you have on this buyer's agency. So if you end up taking this person to new construction and oh my gosh, they are paying, 3% and a bonus and you're super excited. Well, your buyer needs to understand that you're getting that. And so if you originally had them sign a buyer's agency that says 2.5%, now you need to send them an updated buyer's agency where you've changed it to 3% plus the bonus. Because that's the whole point of this. Everybody needs to understand what we're getting paid and who's paying it.
There's not just an amendment. You have to resend the whole buyer's agency.
Yeah, but I usually would just cross through it and initial the change. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it does need to match. So I usually start with 2.5%. And then you've got a section here for bonuses. You can charge your buyer or whoever's going to pay you a flat fee. You could also do a flat fee or some other specific amount that's arranged between you two.
I just wanted to say some agents who utilize like the transaction coordinating services, they charge that to the buyer. So they put the the commission of 2.5 or 3%, whatever, and then they put in the TC fee.
Okay.
As well, so they check both boxes.
They're checking the fee, the brokerage fee, and then which one, the others, the flat fee. Okay, so yeah, you could check more than one of these boxes, is what Taylor was saying. In case you guys can't hear, she's a transaction coordinator here at the firm. For working with a buyer from contract to closing, it's $350 that the firm charges for that. So you could get that $350 from your buyer if you wanted to here on this form. So that's a smart idea. Yeah, the seller could pay that as well. Okay, now, the buyer's agency is stating to the buyer that they are responsible for your commission, okay? But there is this section here, which is the section that we've all kind of been operating under. I mean, I've been doing real estate for 15 years and I've been operating this way and I've never been paid a commission by a buyer. That may change soon, but this section here does tell the buyer that you are going to seek this compensation from the seller or the listing firm. You're going to seek some or all of this compensation from them. We're going to try to do that. But however, this is the most important line. However, the buyer understands that neither a seller nor a listing firm has a duty to pay the firm's fee. Okay, so the buyer has to understand if you can't get this 2.5% from the listing firm or the seller, then the buyer is going to be responsible for that 2.5%. Okay. So we need to make sure we're explaining that to people. but we are going to try to get it. And we always try. And 99% of the time we do. But, some agents want to charge a 3% fee, and they're going to get 2.5% from the listing agent or the listing firm, and the other 0.5% they're going to get from the buyer. So that's a easier pill to swallow, I think, for a buyer. But, the whole compensation is a little hard for many people to get used to at this point in time. I think eventually that will change, and buyers will be more open to paying agent compensation, but I don't think we're quite there yet. The protection period. If buyer enters into a contract within blank days after this agreement expires for a property introduced to buyer by firm, then the fee in this section 4 will be deemed earned unless the buyer has entered into another agency agreement with another real estate agent or firm. So if I show a house to somebody tomorrow that I have a buyer agency with, and then 30 days from now, that buyer says, I don't want to work with you anymore. We cancel our agency agreement. I allow them to do it. And then the next day, they want to write a contract on the house that I showed them. As long as they've hired a new realtor and have a new buyer agency, I no longer have any claim to that transaction, that commission, as long as they've hired a new realtor. Okay, so you're not protected as long as they've hired a new realtor and they have a new buyer's agency. I think people think they still have that protection, but if the person has hired now, if the person's going directly to the seller and trying to cut all agents out of the deal, then you are still protected per this clause here. But if they've hired another realtor, then you just SOL, unfortunately. I typically put 45 days in this spot. Okay. Dual agency, a whole section about explaining to your buyers what dual agency is. You kind of have to explain it because they're not going to read this word for word. You notice here, we cannot fill out this section here yet because this is going to need to be initialed by the buyer. So it's not any check boxes or anything that we take care of right here. And we're going to talk about this when we put the initials. I'm going to talk about some best practices for this because a lot of us have been doing it incorrectly. Okay, we'll talk about material facts. Again, I'm not going to go over the parts that we can't change. Okay, number 12, additional terms. So in most of all the North Carolina real estate documents, I feel like this is the only space where you can really kind of get something done in this contract that the contract doesn't already have written in there. Like we're not allowed to, in the offer to purchase, we're not allowed to just write whatever we want in there because that's kind of practicing law, and we're not supposed to do that because we're not attorneys. But in the buyer's agency, because it's between you and the buyer, you can add any additional terms in here that you both agree to. Taylor, do you see a lot of interesting things on these lines here? Taylor sees a lot of the paperwork, so there might be an explanation about that, like additional fee, like if an agent charges their buyer a paperwork fee or a transaction handling fee of $200 to offset their transaction fee with the company. I mean, I've seen people explain that in this section sometimes, but nothing else weird. Okay. Yeah, mostly NA. That's a good point. If there's ever a line in any of these forms that you don't have anything to say, make sure you just put NA. So we know that there's not supposed to be anything there. Okay, everything's going to be auto-populated from my profile down there at the bottom. Okay. We're going to quickly go through the offer to purchase because you guys know it's 17 pages. And honestly, I think this one is one that a lot of us have more comfort around. We don't see as many problems or mistakes in the offer to purchase, but there's not a lot of places where you can make up your own stuff in the offer to purchase. It's just really terms that go in here. It's all the addendums and amendments and things like that where we start to get kind of interesting. I'm going to look at who the seller is on this property. Jerry Sanderson. Okay. Now, the other thing I could do is check the attachments to make sure there's not a spouse, because if I check this, nope, property disclosure only has Jerry Sanderson, so I'm good here. Yeah, I usually check here to see if there's a spouse that I need to include on this document. And of course, who could you also ask? The listing agent, if anybody else needs to be included on here. We really don't need to fill out any other information here, and we don't need to put their email address unless we're sending it to the seller. At some point in time, maybe you might need to send something across to the other side, but we're not going to do that right now. If you need to add a spouse, you would add them right here. Okay. A lot of this information, this is something we do see. Not very much of this is filled out, and that's going to cause problems with the closing attorney because they do look at this section of the contract to make sure that you have all the legal information in there, and they're double checking it to make sure it's correct. Please complete this section, you guys. If you're not understanding where this information is, I mean, you can always find it on the tax card. I always have to click over here to really open up Realist Tax. But especially like the deed book and pages, those are here in the tax record. You just need to go down here to the last time that it was sold, and you can get the deed book and page. I just have to separate the book and the page. Subdivision should be pretty easy to find. Beckett. Okay. The PIN ID is again in the tax record. For other description, I usually put the legal description of the property, which is usually the lot, the block, the section, that number that starts with an L usually. Let's see what it is for this one. Yeah, L24 M49 copy. Bring that over here. Okay. So just complete that section as much as you can. If you don't know where to find the information, contact us and we'll help you find it. This property will not include a mobile home. Let's always make sure we're checking all the appropriate boxes. Don't leave boxes unchecked if you just don't know the answer. This isn't going to have an additional parcel. Here. For this scenario, we're just going to use the list price. I hope you guys get it. Okay. Due diligence fees, obviously negotiable. They've definitely been coming down the last few years, I've noticed. I hope you guys have noticed that too. It was kind of crazy there for a while. But if you're going to have a due diligence fee, you need to include it here. Let's just say for this property, it's going to be $3,000. Please make sure you're checking the boxes here. This is going to indicate to the seller, well, how are you planning to get me that fee? Is it going to be a personal check, cash? I've never done cash. Did used to do a lot of personal checks. I don't really like those anymore. It takes a while for that money to clear. If the check isn't good, you know, that's not a great situation for the seller. So I prefer official bank check or a wire transfer. You can check multiple boxes if you want to give the seller like an option of how you're going to send them that money. And then electronic transfer would be like a Zelle, one of those kind of services if you wanted to choose that. Earnest money, let's say we're doing $5,000 for this one. And how are we going to get that to the trust account? Is it going to be a check or is it going to be a wire? I usually ask my clients to do a wire for that. Okay, we do have other options. Is you could do an additional earnest money deposit. Sometimes people use that at the end of the due diligence period. They are offering an additional deposit into that trust account. I know that's the way Logan writes all of his contracts. He doesn't do initial earnest money. He only does additional earnest money. So if you'd like to learn more about that strategy, you can talk to Logan about that. He thinks that that makes more sense because why should we tie money up in a trust account if we're not sure that we're going to be moving forward with the purchase of this property, if we're still in the due diligence period, he just likes to make that money go hard at the end of the due diligence period. So that way, if you do have a buyer that backs out of the deal, they're not having to fight over that money that's in the attorney's trust account, because there never was any initial earnest money deposit. So that's why he structures his that way. But, you know, we all kind of do things a different way, and that's what makes this fun. Seller concessions. I do like how all of this is on the first page of the contract now. It used to be kind of spread throughout the contract and you're flipping through trying to find it. So everything's in here now. We're probably going to ask these people for $5,000 of seller concessions. Again, you can use seller concessions to pay a portion of real estate commissions. So if the seller is just not wanting to actually say they're paying a commission, you can get it from them via seller concessions. So some of it could go towards buyer's costs, some of it could go towards commissions. So you would just need to break that down with the attorney later on, okay? And make sure that everything you're asking for in this section is okay with the lender. Because the lender is the one that's going to give you pushback if you're asking for too much. There's limits to how much concessions a buyer can get if they're getting a loan. Due diligence period. So now we have the choice of doing a actual date, or we can do just a number of days. And I've kind of liked doing the number of days because, you know, if you're submitting this offer and you don't know when it's going to get signed, it might take a few days for the offer to get signed. I like having this like 21 days after it's become a contract.
North Carolina goes by calendar days, is that correct?
Calendar day. Oh, business days versus calendar days. Yes, it's calendar days. Yes. In South Carolina, they do business days for some of the parts of the contract, but in North Carolina, this is just literally like every calendar day. Even if it's a holiday, it still counts for this 21 days. That's a good point. And then we're going to have our closing. Let's say March 31st. Okay, you're going to put the name of the closing attorney. Our company does not hold earnest money, so you need to find a trust account to put that money in. I like to use Lane Law, Charlie Lane. He's kind of one of our partners here at the firm. Great, like, independent attorney, so you can really talk to him and get questions answered, which is nice. If anybody needs Charlie's contact information, let us know. But yeah, we do need to put the escrow account, who's holding that account, on that line. Okay, we can't fill much out here till we get to leased items. So if there was something that the seller is currently leasing, they don't own it, you need to make sure you put it on this line so that everybody knows that it's not going to come with the house, or that the buyer is going to need to take over those lease payments for that item. It could be, I'm thinking one of those things could be a satellite dish or like a solar panel, things that just the seller does not own. We want to make sure we fill that out. And then things that do not convey, that the buyer might think convey, we need to make sure we list those here. Could be the chandelier in the dining room. So typically that is something that would convey, but this particular seller wants you to know they're taking that down, they're taking it with them. So we have to label that here. Okay, and then personal property that they're going to include would be like a refrigerator. And you have to be kind of specific here because, you know, a house could have multiple fridges. There could be a fridge in the garage, or a fridge upstairs in the bonus room, be a fridge in the kitchen. You just got to be specific about what personal property you're talking about. Yep. Washer and dryer and laundry. I usually write this, all items viewed in home on, what was the date we saw this? 2/14/26. That's just so they can't say like, oh, we sold those and we got different ones and they put some crappy stuff in there that you don't want. So it's the ones that you saw when you were in the house, just to be specific. And I think a lot of agents just have kind of their own way of filling that out. A lot of times you can put an all at no value so that the lender doesn't flag you for getting all this personal property that's worth a lot of money, and you just want to tell them it's like no value. We're not making money off this personal property. Okay, and then we're going to go to buyer representations. So are they going to be paying strictly cash? Are they going to be doing a combination of cash and a loan? This is typically, what we're checking, but it's nice to have a cash buyer. If you do have a cash buyer, you're all going to want to provide a proof of funds with this offer, and you can check here to say if it's attached or if it's not attached. So we're going to be getting a first mortgage loan. I think with this property that we're not going to be going FHA, or, well, we probably could go VA, but we're just going to check conventional for this one. Now I usually to indicate the down payment that my buyer is offering, I usually do this in this section here. So they're going to be borrowing 80% of the value of the home, which means they're putting down 20%. So that's indicating to the listing agent that they're putting down 20%. You could also just put an actual number here. Like if they're putting down 40K, you can put $40,000 on this line. This to me just is a little bit more flexible. If we end up going back and forth on the price, I don't have to keep changing this number. So, okay, and then your person might be getting a second loan. You would obviously fill that out here. Okay, if your buyer needs to sell other property to purchase this home, you are supposed to indicate that here in this section of the contract. But please note, there are no contingencies in the North Carolina contract. So even if your buyer has to sell a house, this purchase is not contingent upon them doing that. This is just a disclosure from you to the sellers that this person's gonna, physically have to sell this home to purchase your home, but that's something we're gonna have to figure out on our end. And due diligence fees are not refunded if the person cannot get the home sold. Earnest money is not refunded if it's after the due diligence period. Like, all those monies are still gonna go to the seller. This is just telling the seller what they're up against with this buyer, basically. If you do want to create an actual contingency and protect some of those funds, you will have to get an attorney to draft a contingency that is an addendum to this contract, because there's no way to do it in the North Carolina contract. There used to be, but there's not. So you just have to indicate to the sellers, you have to disclose. That's basically a material fact about your buyer that you have to disclose to the seller. Now, when properties have been on the market for a while, some sellers will accept this situation. I've seen it actually happen a lot lately, but just know that there is no true contingency in the North Carolina contract. For this scenario, I'm going to say that they do not have to do that. But if they do, you just need to make sure that you check the appropriate boxes. Their house is under contract, then you're going to provide them with that information. If it's not under contract, then you're going to select, well, what status is this house in? Like, is the buyer trying to sell the house like on their own? That's kind of the worst case scenario, right? A lot of sellers aren't going to want to accept that situation, but it could be the situation. So you just need to make sure that you are honest in this section of the offer. Okay, did they get the property disclosure? We did. It was attached to the MLS. Thank you. We did get the MOG. Okay, seller has owned this property for at least 1 year. You can confirm that via tax records. It is not a lead-based paint situation, so we do not need to check that box. We are going to make sure we name any owners associations. And just be careful with owners associations. Kind of do your research on that. If it's something that your buyers are really concerned about, what can we do in this owners association? How much are the fees? You can't always go by what's in the MLS. Don't just check here. Also cross-reference with what these sellers have put in the property disclosure. So see if those both match. If anything's seeming off, I mean, it's up to us to do the extra research for our buyers to make sure that the HOA information that we're given is accurate. Okay, you can call the HOA. I know it's a pain, but you know, if anything's seeming off about the dues or how often they're paid, or I mean, if your buyer is literally just like, I have a camper, I need to live in a neighborhood where I can put it in the driveway, you got to call the HOA. So do all that stuff before this offer gets accepted. If it's important to your buyer, it's important to you, and you need to verify it. Okay, it's just, sorry, didn't mean to go on a tangent, but verify HOA information is basically what I'm saying. So here they're saying, oh, it did? Oh, sorry, guys. Let me share again. Did I do screen? Was that what I did, Taylor? Okay. Is it better? Okay. 300 a quarter. Hawthorne Management is what I got here. Okay, they were 300 quarter, but I'm going to verify that. This home does not have a fuel tank. Oh, and if you do have this information, if you can get it from the MLS, you know, include it. I think it's best practice to complete this as much as possible. And especially the things that are, I mean, important to your buyer. If this whole HOA is like a huge deal to them, you got to get all this information for them before you write this offer. Okay, no fuel tank. There is not a lease on the property. Maybe if you have an investor purchasing the property, there might be a lease on the property. So you would check the other box, obviously. Okay, on this line right here, so really this line is designed to indicate the name that you want on the deed if it is not the names that are up there on the purchase line. So if it's like some other name that's not clear by who's purchasing it, you would put that here, like a relative or what's it saying, a trust that's going to be the beneficiary of this property. So if it's just the names that are on the top line, the purchaser line, you don't need to put anything here. But if it's something different, for example, like if the husband's name is on the purchaser line because the loan is in his name, you could put the husband and the wife's name on this line so that that indicates to the attorney that's looking at this, like we want both of those names on the deed. Okay. Okay, we're asking the seller for a home warranty. Some of us love home warranties, others of us don't care. Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, we're in the middle of a training right
Sorry
now.
about that. I'm dropping off some things.
Oh, more more things got dropped off.
Sorry, I'm about to leave this here with you guys.
Yeah. Thank
Oh,
you.
sorry again.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, I'll go on.
We'll get Tom to fill us in on that later. You know who that is?
Insurance.
Oh, insurance. Okay.
Business payment.
We just got beer dropped off to us. Cool. That's interesting. Okay. Possession of the home. So are you going to be attaching a buyer possession before closing or seller possession after closing? You would check those boxes if necessary. I think for this particular situation, we do not need to check any of these boxes. Remember that the parties to a contract can draft their own addenda. So a buyer and a seller can draft their own separate addenda that goes along with this contract, but you as the agent are not supposed to be drafting any addenda, okay? Because you're not a party to the contract. You're just facilitating, okay? Unless you're the buyer, yeah. you would be a party to the contract then. And then you could draft your own addendum. That's a good point. Okay. Sorry, that's a long one, y'all, but that's my spiel on the after purchase. Brian, you have anything to add? And I appreciate Taylor's input too, because she sees a lot of the ways agents fill these things out. So she really gets a very good perspective. Okay, obviously with the RPODs, you know, you're just going to have your buyers going to be initialing and signing this document. Obviously, they're going to be reviewing it. You're going to be reviewing it with them. And then professional services disclosure. So if some of you are new to the firm, I know I've been at other firms that have not required this document in our checklist. So when I came here like 3 years ago, it was kind of a new thing to me for this to be required. But now that I've completed this document for every transaction, I really do appreciate the document because it really is just to cover your okay? This document proves that you had certain conversations with your buyer. And so your buyer can't come back later and say, well, you didn't tell me this and you didn't tell me that and you didn't say I should have gotten that. Because if you discuss this document with them, then you had to have these conversations with them because they're either agreeing to doing certain things as a part of the purchase or they're saying, nope, you told me about it and I didn't want to do it. And so that's what this document is for. Now, there's a lot of items on here that most buyers don't utilize every single component of these services. So a lot of them will end up being waived, but at least you're pointing out to them that they should be thinking about these services, okay? If you're buying a house and you're, you know, concerned about your finances and how that's going to affect your taxes, you should probably contact your accountant. You know, you should consult with them and say, I'm purchasing an $800,000 house this year. How's that going to affect my taxes for next year? Are they going to do it? Maybe not, probably not, but you at least had that conversation with them. Appraisal is going to be required. Obviously, if you're getting a loan, that's going to be selected. If you're not getting a loan, you still might have an appraisal. The attorney that's going to handle the closing, that's typically going to be selected. Home warranty could go either way. Does your buyer want that or not want that? Explain to them what the home warranty is. Now we have the inspection section. You know, we're going to always recommend that they have a general home inspection, but there's all sorts of other inspections they could have. They could have a further investigation of the HVAC. If there's a pool, you would want to get that checked out. We really like to recommend people get radon tests. And then there's a whole section down here that explains why radon tests are important. So I like those sections that kind of point that out. If you have a septic tank, you're going to want to recommend that your buyer get that inspected / pumped. If there's a well, we're going to want to get that checked out. Some properties have a lot more things that need to get checked out than other properties, but this form is great to discuss all of those options with your buyer. I would usually be going over this form like shortly after going under contract because we want to get these things lined up if they opt into them, especially some of them take longer, like if you get in a survey, you know, that could be a few weeks out. So you really want to have that conversation pretty early after going under contract. The wood pest infestation, re-inspection of repairs. You know, you can have the inspector come back out there, look at repairs that the seller has done. Did you utilize that? Insurance for the property insurance, flood insurance. Are we getting it? Do we not need it? Flood insurance program elevation certificate. I actually think that is required as a part of what the lender does. So you could put lender here and just say, yes. Mortgage loan, did we get one or not? And then survey. So the two things they have extra notes down here about is the radon and the survey. Okay. It's really important that you talk to your seller or buyers about surveys and why they are important. Especially when a property is transferring hands like that. You know, a survey can point out a lot of issues that are going to be hard to remedy later on. And you won't really have any recourse if you didn't get a survey. People don't like to get them. They're expensive, but it's really, when you're buying something that's your biggest investment, spend the extra money to get a survey. And then radon is harmful. So we want people to know if they have radon in their home. Okay. As far as the signatures go, when I name my envelopes, I usually change what it has in here. I usually put like offer paperwork or whatever the address is. 7 there. This is just for me to remember what is in this envelope, because as the process goes on, you might get several envelopes in your file, and then you don't know what's in the envelope. So you have to click in there and see. I just rename it. Who needs to sign this? Now, since we connected to the MLS, it's including like the seller's agent. We don't necessarily want him to sign this, but there could be scenarios where you want the agent to immediately receive a copy of whatever it is that's being signed. So you can choose that option if you want them to go ahead and just quickly get the copy rather than you having to get it in your inbox and then forward it to them, or no action. I always have automatic reminders enabled. Okay, the part I really want to make sure we all understand is the tagging of the buyer agency, because we're seeing a lot of problems with those documents coming into us. Again, the system's going to, go ahead and tag mostly everything for you, but you do need to go through and make sure that it is all done properly. So in the buyer's agency, this is our problematic section right here, the dual agency section. So it's going to automatically put an initial for the buyer on every single one of these lines. They are not supposed to initial every single one of these lines. And I think the reason the system does that is to give the buyer a choice. Because, we've all been talking about buyers understanding their choices, the compensation, everything like that. The problem with these tags is if you click on them, they're grayed out and required to be optional. So if you just send this the way it is, your buyer is going to see all of these, and it's going to give them the choice to either initial all of those or not initial any of them. And so when it comes back to you, it's not correct. So the problem here is we have to delete all of these tags in this section. And I know this is an extra step, but just go ahead and delete them and re-tag it where you want it tagged. So I'm going to tag it for dual agency. And now this field is not optional. So the person will have to initial that section. I'm also going to tag it here because I don't want to represent both sides of the deal. And if something like that situation did happen, we would designate an agent to represent the other party. So those are the two places I tag it, and I do not give them options. I think in this scenario, it's okay to not give them an option. But make sure you're explaining it, why they're signing where they're signing. It's already tagged for everything else here. You've got your initials on the offer. Something I do want to point out that I'm not sure a lot of people know about is if you forgot to add somebody that needs to be tagged on here, like you forgot there was a wife, you can add another recipient at this point. You can never add more documents. Once you're in the DigiSign section, you can't add any more documents or forms. So you want to make sure your documents are all squared away before you do this portion, but you can add a recipient. So you can always add another person here if you forgot. And you can also manipulate the order that people receive these documents. So the way that it's set up just out the box is everybody's going to get the documents at the same time. And whenever they get to them and they sign them. You're not going to receive them back until they're completed. But let's say there was a scenario where you wanted one person to get it first, and then you wanted the next person to only receive it after that first person had signed it. That's where you would add a signing group. Okay, add a signing group. Oh no, what happened to my person? Let me cancel and try again. They disappeared. Yes, add a signing group and drag that person to the second group, okay? So now this person's gonna get it first, and Sally won't get it until Allison has signed it. Alternatively, everybody's just gonna get it at the same time, okay? I don't know if everybody knows that that's an option, so I just wanted to point it out. Everything else with your tags should be pretty accurate, but you're just gonna double check that everything is tagged where you want it to be. Signatures. You are gonna have to tag this because that is an external document, so it doesn't know. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time. Buyer signature. I have in my preferences that anytime I tag for a signature, it also does the date. That's just in my preferences up here. But you can opt in or out to that because usually you do need a date when you need a signature, so it makes it easy. Now for the professional services disclosure, again, I would probably be sending that at a different time. And you can't fill out any information on this once you're in the DigiSign portion of things, but you can, tag it for what they've selected and not selected. So again, I would probably be sending this at a different time than I would be sending an offer. And you have to sign this as well, the professional services. So this professional services does need to be tagged. Okay, we're going to send that. It sets you up. Anytime you put a buyer's agency in your envelope, it's going to say, please review and sign your buyer's agreement. If you want to change what it says because you have other things, go ahead and change it. I don't put a whole lot of information here because I don't think people read it. But I do text them and say, your documents are ready for signature. It's always going to give you the option to sign the document for yourself right then and there. And I always take that option because I don't want to forget to do it later on. Bye, Brian. And this is the same way that your buyer sees it. It's just how you're seeing it. They have the same experience. Okay. So now when I said I'm done, it's going to take me back into my file. So I've gone back to Forms. I was in Forms, then I was in DigiSign, and now I'm back to Forms. And it's showing that I've signed the documents, but the other person hasn't signed them yet. You can always see like the history of when everybody looked at everything here, if you'd like to. If you need to make a change, like you made a mistake in this envelope, I'm trying to think of what you need to add some text somewhere or something. You can correct the envelope here, but just note that if you ever correct an envelope and somebody's already signed it, it's going to make everybody re-sign it again. So even though I already signed it, if I go in here and correct it and make a change, it's going to send it to me again because I need to know about all the changes. Oh, a question, yes.
Just someone asked if we were gonna go over the compensation.
Yes, we can go over that next. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into the compensation agreement. Yeah, I did want to go over forms that you guys particularly have questions about. So I'm glad that somebody brought that up. So let me go back. Where are my files? It's weird. There they are. Oh, I freaked out for a moment. Let me go. I made a file earlier that had a bunch of forms in it that I just wanted to talk to you guys about. Let me add that particular form. It's form 220, I'm assuming they're asking about. Okay, let's look at that document. I love one-page forms. Okay, cooperative compensation agreement. So obviously this is kind of a newer form. We've only had it a couple has it been 2 years we've had this form? Even, maybe? So, some of us are still getting used to it. Of course, we know how to fill out the top, seller, buyer, property. Typically, when this document would be completed is in one of two areas. I usually have this document completed by the seller when I have them sign a listing agreement, because I want them to go ahead and confirm what compensation they're offering to a buyer's agent and have it be a part of my listing documentation. The other time you might use this form is if you are representing a buyer and you're sending an offer to a listing agent, and the listing agent has told you they don't have a Form 220, the seller hasn't agreed to a compensation. You would fill this out with your buyer and ask for the compensation and then send it to the seller. So that's the two scenarios that I see this form being used: as a part of a listing package signed by a seller, communicating to a buyer's agent what they're offering from the get-go, or a buyer's agent putting together this form as a part of an offer package and sending it to a listing agent to get the seller to agree to a compensation. Even if the seller is has upfront agreed to 2.5%, you as a buyer's agent, if you're charging your buyer 3%, could send them this document and now ask for 3%. Okay, just because they said 2.5 doesn't mean you can't ask for 3 or 4 or whatever. Remember, we don't have certain numbers, but that's the two scenarios that I'm using this form. If anybody else has any other tips on when they use this form, I'd love to hear it. So this fee section, I know this is like kind of confusing because you have the option of choosing whether the seller is going to be paying the compensation or the listing firm is going to be paying the compensation. It's really just semantics, honestly, because this compensation is going to be indicated on the closing disclosure, and it doesn't matter if it's coming from the seller or the listing firm. It's going to be the same amount. And it's not even really going to be indicated on there. I always click seller because that's a conversation I had with the seller. The seller is taking a portion of their proceeds and giving it to the buyer's agent. So I always check seller. And this is where you would actually, if you're the listing agent, talk with the seller. What are you willing to offer? This is the number we would put here. If you're the buyer's agent, this is the number you're asking the seller to pay. Yes, Tricia.
Can I ask a question about, like, why would you ever choose selling firm instead of the seller? Because it's just elongating the process. You're taking money
Mhm.
from the closing table, no matter if it was directed in one way or another.
Mhm.
And you're routing it now through the firm before it goes to, then it gets, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's just another step.
and it's really, again, just that's what I'm saying. It's just semantics. It's just a different way of saying the same thing. Now there could be some scenario somewhere in North Carolina where, a listing firm is collecting that money and then sending it to the buyer's agent firm. We don't do that, but there could be scenarios where there's listing firms that are doing that. Maybe like a sole proprietor or something. But for me, it only makes sense to put seller.
Right.
And for most scenarios, I think that would
Most
make
of
the
the time
most
I see
sense.
it on the attorney info sheet,
Yeah,
say where it's coming from.
yeah,
They only give you one option.
yeah. The
Seller.
attorneys aren't giving us an
Yeah,
option.
so it doesn't, right.
I just don't want to ever confuse a seller,
Mm-hmm.
make it seem like, oh, I don't have to pay that.
Oh, the listing firm could pay it. Yeah,
Confirm it. It's
Yeah.
confusing. Like,
right,
I don't want to.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I was not, in the wrong. I
No,
was missing something, like, was there a reason for?
no. And I think this form it's in its infancy, and I think it will change every year, like to match kind of what people are using it for. So this is a like more original version of this form, and I think it's probably going to be changing as this whole scenario changes. You can also ask for a flat fee commission if you don't want to do the percentage or some other arrangement. Now, this part's kind of confusing too, because it's asking you like, well, how long is the seller offering this compensation? Well, best practice is to obviously put the date that you're planning on closing on the property on this line. I mean, you want them to be offering that up until the closing, right? Because that's when you're going to actually earn it. If you're a buyer's agent, you would put the date of the closing, or even better would be to push this date out maybe like 2 or 3 weeks after the closing in case it doesn't close at the anticipated time, so that you just make sure that this offer of compensation is spanning all of the time that you're going to be working with this buyer. So if you were a buyer agent filling this out, again, if my closing was on March 31st, I would probably push this out. There's no reason you couldn't put any date in the future. There's just no limit to it. So just put a few weeks after the closing. And then the beauty here is that, again, everybody knows what's going down with the compensation. Everybody has to sign this. The buyer's agent, the listing agent, the seller, and the buyer. So everybody's on the same page. Did that answer the questions about that form, or did anybody have any other questions?
I actually have a follow-up and we can take it offline if,
Mhm.
for the interest of time. But I'm wondering if it's a bad idea to collect this with, I know we're talking about a buyer, situation right now, but is it a bad idea to have this on file with your listings? Or should you do this, with, just as a step with your offer?
Well, that's what I was saying. As a listing agent, I collect this as a piece of my listing paperwork
Right, okay.
because I'm having that conversation with the seller.
That's
Now,
negotiations.
yeah.
So is it harder to just re-sign it with every offer?
Only if it differs from the original one that the seller agreed to.
Okay.
And some sellers are not going to agree to it up front. As much as I encourage them to do so, they may say, well, I want to see the offers come in and I want to see what people are asking for, and then I'll agree to it. Which then it wouldn't be. It's not a required part of our listing paperwork checklist, right? It's just like an optional, depending on how you want to handle it with your seller. But yeah, I mean, it could change based on the offer, and then that seller may agree to something different. So it just really depends on the seller.
Yeah, I guess.
But
it can just be like
yeah, I mean, it's a good talking point for sure. If you're trying to encourage your seller to offer compensation, I would at least show them this document and say, look, this is how we can communicate to buyers agents that they're going to be compensated, and this is how it looks. So. Okay. I know I'm losing people because we're now at 12:30. Are there any other forms or questions about forms that anybody in the chat wants me to answer? I didn't even get to any listing documents, but I want to talk about SkySlope for a few minutes. So, okay, if anybody thinks of anything, let me know. We can always do a part 2 on this as well because there's so many forms. But if you guys ever have questions about how to fill out forms, you have your multiple broker in charges, Barry, Andrea here in the Charlotte office, Barry in the Mooresville office. Joe is the North Carolina broker in charge for the South Carolina Fort Mill office. So you have 3 broker in charges that you can reach out to if you ever have questions about how to complete a document. Or you could even ask Amanda as well, because she's the one that's going to ultimately review your document, and she's the one that's going to tell you if it's right or wrong. So, but yeah, just for different scenarios, we might tell you the best way to complete your forms. But we're always here to help answer those questions for you guys. I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but there's just so many forms and so little time. But we'll probably do a part 2 as well as a South Carolina forms training as well. But I did want to ultimately get back to SkySlope because, again, this is kind of the area that there seems to be a disconnect with a lot of people in the firm, taking these forms that have been signed from forms over back into SkySlope. Because again, we don't know that you got that house under contract. Roger doesn't know that. So you have to tell us within 72 hours.
just from a TC point, I cannot access your forms either.
Yes, that's a good point. Taylor was saying as a transaction coordinator, she can't get into your forms files. So she can get into your sky slope.
Yeah, or just send me the
Yeah.
signed form.
And if the forms are signed, they will migrate over into your sky slope in certain places. But yeah, forms is just like your playground, and sky slope is like your school. Okay. like that's where things are important. Like you have to show us that you have transactions and listings. We're always checking if you have a listing in MLS, we are checking to see if your documents are in sky slope, and we are going to be talking to you about that. If you have something in MLS, you better believe you need to have a sky slope listing up in here. The way to do that is to come back into your sky slope, and you're going to click this create new button, and you only have two choices. It's either listing or transaction. And then it's going to start asking you some questions. Now, when you click into this box, it's going to already automatically know all the things that you are doing over there in your forms files. Okay, so you can select the file that you are working with. Actually, I'm going to go back for a step and change this to a buyer, guys. Sorry, not a listing. I'm going to make it a transaction. It's going to ask us if it's purchase, and then you have an option here to put in your buyer agencies as a pre-contract. So you can go ahead and get the file started if you already have that buyer agency signed. You can choose pre-contract. If the buyer is already under contract, obviously you would choose this option. And then again, it's going to bring in my documents. I'll pick the one I was just playing with. So because I had that file set up and I gave it a lot of information, it's going to already know the answers to some of these questions, but it's not going to know all of them. That was a single family. File ID is optional. This is a very important part. Picking the right checklist. If it's a new construction, you got to pick the new construction checklist. If it's a lot of land, you got to pick that right checklist. If you pick the wrong one, like South Carolina and you're in North Carolina, it's going to ask you for all the wrong stuff. So just confirm that you've got the right checklist. And you can always fix it later on. If you pick the wrong checklist, you're not like locked into that forever. You can go back and change it. And I can show you where you can do that. I think we were closing March 31st. We don't have escrow numbers. These are just kind of like FYI questions. Let's say I picked them up from farming. Because lots of brokerages use this platform, there's a lot of questions in here that don't really matter to Roger, but might matter to, say, like a Remax or another brokerage that is using this platform. But for us, not so much. Okay, it already knows who the buyer and seller are. Fantastic. Oh, it makes me put a phone number. I'm going to give you guys a little tip. You don't really need to put the actual phone number. You can just put some numbers in there. Okay. It already knows who the listing agent is, buyer's agent, who's wanting their phone number. Make it, always just make SkySlope happy. Just make the buttons turn blue. Sometimes you just have to put something in there, to make it happy. If you keep using the same attorney, it's going to save that information in there for you. We'll give a plug to Motivation Mortgage today. Oh, you get to choose if you're going to be using a transaction coordinator. Hopefully, a lot of you say yes. What does it say when I say yes? Oh. Well, here you would put, do I put Roger or Realty. I think it's specific to my account. Okay. Yeah. So you could say Realty One Group. And then we would know it was in-house. Okay. I'm putting Taylor at Gmail. That's not Taylor's email, but I'm just trying to move forward. There was not a referral agent. Okay, you do need to break down your commissions here. It's asking for sale commission and listing commission, but the only reason you would put something in both of these fields is if you were representing both sides and you were collecting commission on both sides. Okay, so let's say I'm working with the buyer on this. I'm going to get the sale commission. Let's say it's 2.5%. I'm not getting any listing commission, so I'm going to put 0. And then how much is Taylor getting paid? Was there a deposit? Again, this is more for companies that, yeah, we don't hold earnest money, so you could skip that part. And now finally, it's going to create my transaction. And this is the beautiful checklist. Okay, so all the things that are red on the checklist are things that we need to upload to the checklist or connect from our forms file. I don't think I got the document signed, so I'm not sure it's going to show me the documents here. When you click attach, if you did have the documents signed in forms, they're going to appear right here underneath this box. So you can just click it and attach it. But if you're pulling the documents from zip forms or some other file, or they're just not in your forms file, they're not going to show up there, and you're just going to have to physically upload the document. But it is nice, everything you do in forms and it's signed will be listed right here. Again, remember we were talking about if you had a question about something, you can send a note to Amanda here. Like, sometimes there'll be something required and you don't know why. You can just put that note in there to Amanda. Bye, Alan. And Amanda, she's alerted every time like you put a note in here, and she will check it and then she will respond to you right here within SkySlope. I didn't know if everybody knew they could do that. Any questions from anybody about the checklists and like what documents are required? I know, again, we've got some new faces, new people. You could see here for a buyer in North Carolina, we do require the traditional things. We do have the Form 220, whether it came from the seller originally or from the buyer. You do need to upload your pre-approval from if they're using a lender, or proof of funds for cash, a copy of the MLS sheet, the receipt of the due diligence. That's page 17 of the contract. We do require the property disclosure, the MOG, professional services. Is it 14? Sorry. I thought the contract was 17 pages now. I'm stuck in my old ways. And then you need the CD, the closing transaction form. So that's either in SkySlope under working documents or in the shared Google Drive. You do need to upload that in here because it doesn't come over from your forms file. And then this is just for Amanda. The bottom one is when we've received the commission, she marks it as received in here. So sometimes we've got received commission and everything else is red, which we hate. Don't do that. Okay. And you can see up here at the top, like I've got my form set up so that everything links to SkySlope, and there's always that option up at the top that when you create files to link it to SkySlope, you do want to do that because then it's going to make it easier to attach everything when you get that transaction under contract. I do want to point one more thing out in SkySlope. When you have a listing, I'm going to click on an old listing that I had. This is old, sorry. But let's say I've got the listing in SkySlope. Let's say I got a contract on the listing. You do have to change this to a transaction. You can't just leave it as a listing because when you accept a contract on it, it's going to open up a whole new section of the checklist where you're going to put the contract and the signed disclosures and all that good stuff that's going to come with having a buyer on that listing. If you never click that button, it's still going to appear to us that it's just a listing. And then we get a check and then we're like, but we didn't know you had a contract on this listing. This button will only turn gold when you have something in all of these red spots. You have to have something in the checklist in order for this to turn gold. It won't let you click it until you have something in there. The things don't have to be approved. They can still be yellow. You know, Amanda doesn't have to have reviewed it for you to actually accept the contract. So make sure you accept your contracts on your listings. Okay. Any final questions from anybody? I'm going on 2 hours of talking. I don't even know if there's anybody left in the Google Meet. Oh, great. Thanks, guys. And this was recorded because I know it was a lot. If anybody ever wants to go over these procedures again, you know, this will be recorded. It'll be in our YouTube channel, and we have them in the Google and in the Google Drive folder, agent resources, anything we record, we put in there. Just if you guys ever are ever doubtful about this process, you know, first check the Google Drive folder, check that compliance. It's a 2-page document that tells you pretty much in a nutshell everything that I went over today, the procedure to make sure that the company knows about your listings and transactions. Check that first. If you still have questions, come to us. There's just a bunch of stuff in that folder that I'm not sure everybody's aware of. I mean, let me see if I can open it up really quick to just give you guys a sneak peek. I mean, there are folders that contain a lot of the forms that I've been talking about, the wire instructions. You can get all the Realty One Group Revolution logos in this folder. Here's the training video recordings. We have other how-tos on the tools and things in here. The information about using a transaction coordinator with the company, a video about how to send the newsletter. So just when you have time, go through here. There's just so many things in here that are going to be helpful to you, or you might have had questions about, and you can find them in this folder. Again, shared every Sunday evening in Taylor's email. And once you accept that shared drive, it'll always appear in your drive because we shared it with you. So that's pretty much it for today. If there's no other questions, I'll let everybody here get a donut and a beer. And sorry, people at home, you don't get that, but that's the benefit of coming to the trainings. All right, I'm going to log off. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.